Well, this week I've been thinking about summer and thinking about the best summer ever and thinking about, what really leads to the best summer ever for you, for your family, for me and my family. How can we actually get to the place in August and look back on the summer of 2019 and really go, man, that was an extraordinary summer. Like, that was such a remarkable summer. That was the best summer ever. I mean, is that even possible? Can we do that? And so I was just thinking about that this week, and I started exploring different things and going, how can we do this? And I was on social media looking at a lot of different things and what people were saying you got to do, and then talking with a bunch of my friends, like, what are you going to do this summer to make it the best summer ever? And so I just kind of put together a bucket list. And this is a bucket list of, if I do these things, if we do these things, then perhaps this will lead to the best summer ever. So some of the things I heard about and saw this week are things like this, is that, if it's going to be the best summer ever, you've got to go to the beach and have a big beach vacation, with your little shovel and the whole thing. And if you can put that in the bucket, man, that's going to be awesome. It's going to lead to a great, great summer. In addition to that, I heard about, you got to go play Frisbee. Maybe you've got a dog, throw this with your dog and watch it jump. And, such a cool moment. Everybody's so excited. So got to do that this summer. And then this summer, we've got to go to the zoo. I mean, just for me to go to the zoo, or for me and my kids to go to the zoo, if you do that this summer, in addition to these things, that's going to lead to a great summer. And then, of course, you have to go to the lake and ride this cool sailboat. And so if you go to the lake and get on a boat and hang out with your friends and, or hang out with your family, maybe do pontoon boat or speedboat or whatever, man, this is going to lead to such a great summer. You got to do this like almost every day, right? In addition to that, hey, let's go play football, get all your friends together. Or if you play football in school, you're training for the next football season, this has got to be part of the summer. And then you've got to go shopping. And if you can go shopping like a whole lot this summer and get some cool flip-flops like this, I know all you guys are coveting over these right now, right? You're all sinning right now. But, if you go shopping, you're like, oh my gosh, I got to go shopping, get the coolest flip-flops. And then it's summer. I mean, we got to have barbecues. So you got to have a bunch of barbecues, get your friends over there. And then 4th of July is such a cool holiday, and we got to celebrate that. And you're going to invite your mother-in-law and your friends and all those kind of, and so you've got that going on this summer. And then in the summer, you've got to eat ice cream. Right. Bluebell, as I said last week, cookies and cream, delicious. So you got to have a lot of ice cream. And then this summer, of course, it wouldn't be a summer without going fishing with your Buzz Lightyear fishing poles, right? And so you got to go fishing and then invite some friends, and you got to do that whole thing. So you got to get that in if you can somehow fit that in. And then in addition to that, your kids are going to be so bored, and perhaps you'll be bored. So you got to play the iPad and a little bit of Fortnite, get that going and see if we can get that in there. And then you have like 10 of these birthday parties. That's kind of a weak little thing, but you have one birthday party, and then you have, here we go, another birthday party and another, and you're like, oh my gosh, like I'm getting exhausted, right? And then you have to go to the pool. Every day you got to, everybody's going to the pool. I got to somehow make this pool thing happen, and how am I going to wear? I don't even know if that's going to stay. And then mom and dad, after that beach vacation with the kids, you are worn out, aren't you? And you need your own tropical vacation. Because if you can do this, it's going to be restful. Life is going to be great. It'll be the best summer ever. And of course, in the midst of all that, you have to go to work because somebody's got to pay for all this. And so you got to stack work on here. You're like, how in the world is this going to work? And oftentimes, this is what we do. We just go, man, if I can cram everything in, and I can do everything the culture tells me to do, I can do everything, the Joneses or the Smiths or my neighbors, or pick whoever you want to pick. If I can keep up, maybe I'll have the best summer ever. The problem with this, and you guys already know where I'm going, the problem with this is not sustainable. The problem with this, and oftentimes when we try to get the most out of the summer, when we're trying to go, hey, I'm going to get the best, summer ever, so it's all about progress, it's all about busyness. We trade that in for our peace. We trade it in for losing control. We trade it in for stress. And guys, the truth is, oftentimes we not only do this when it comes to trying to have the best summer ever, we do this in life, don't we? I mean, this is, we got to run this pace. And if you have kids or maybe your friends or whatever with work and relationships, and morally we got to get on the edge, we got to keep going and going and going because we got to chase those feelings because that's what the world tells us. That's what the world tells us is going to be, meaning in. That's where you're going to have your best experiences ever. And when we try to get the most out of life, oftentimes that's when we lose control of our life. In fact, let me try to explain. You see, think of it this way. When you and I are trying to live on the edge and we're like, okay, in our life or morally or financially or, relationally, this is what it looks like and it's just consuming. When we have little to no margin in our life, do you know what happens? What happens is stress goes up. Stress levels go up and tempers, flare. Think about this. Think about yourself in a car, right? You're in this car and you're late to a meeting and it's a super important meeting. Like this is a make or break kind of meeting. And you're running late to this meeting. What do you feel? What begins to happen physiologically? Like your back tightens, your hands are on the wheel a little bit tighter, your foot's a little bit heavier on the gas pedal. The mustache sweat begins to happen because the focus, right? And then if somebody cuts you off or if somebody's driving too slow and you're late, what happens? All of a sudden you just get all over. You're like, what are you doing? How dare? The temper begins to flare. Why? It's because when you have very little margin, stress goes way up and you're on the edge. And guys, I saw that this week. In fact, I was driving home, and I don't know if you're here, maybe you are, but I was driving home, and there was this person who was following me, and so I turned left on my street, but I didn't put the blinker on, and it's my fault. I should have put a blinker on, but I turned left into my street, and the car knew that or had suspected that I wasn't going to put my blinker, so they got really close, and they're like, what are you doing? And trying to teach me a lesson and show me a point. And so they get really close, rev their engine. And I'm like, I turn and I look in my rear view mirror. Then they roll down their window and they give me that universal sign to say they're not happy with me. And I'm sitting there and honestly, here's what I thought. Honestly, I thought, man, that person must be stressed. Because I'm thinking, really over a blinker? Like you're going to do all that and risk all these over a blinker? That's stress. And that's a lack of margin. You guys have experienced this. You've seen this, or maybe you've experienced it. Where you come home and you're financially stressed, you're on the edge financially, and your son comes up to you and says, hey, Dad, can I have $10 to go to Whataburger because, the ketchup is amazing there. Oh, my gosh, what do they put in that? And all of a sudden, you look at your son and you're like, what? Did you ask me for $10? How dare you ask me for $10? Do you know the value of a dollar? Do you know how hard I work? My goodness, do you know the pressure? And your son is like, Dad, just chill. Come on. Just say no if you can't. What is that? See, guys, that when we live on the edge financially, when we live on the edge morally, relationally, stress levels go up and tempers flare. And you know what else happens? Self-centeredness. If I don't have time for me, I don't have time for you. Don't you ask me anything. And guys, just know today, we're talking, but I'm talking to myself maybe a whole lot more than I'm talking to you because I struggle with this. And I can't tell you how many times when I've tried to, live or work and kids and relationships and money and all that, I'm kind of living on the edge. And when I'm doing that and somebody texts me or somebody calls me and says, hey, Buck, can you help? Hey, this weekend this is coming up. And I feel this emotion. I hear these kind of thoughts inside of me go, are you kidding me? Are you asking me? Don't you know how busy I am? As soon as I hear that, as soon as I feel that, I'm like, oh, I'm living on the edge. Because if I don't have time for me because of my choices to live there, then I certainly don't have time for you. And when there's this self-centeredness and selfishness and stress is up and tempers are flaring, what else suffers? And you guys know this. The most important things in your life suffer. The things that ultimately, all the research will say, leads to happiness in your life. Relationships suffer. Your most important relationships. And now all of a sudden, she just seems like a roommate. And we're just passing one another. And, this intimacy thing, this, dating thing, this adventure thing, this discovery thing, this listening to her thing, this, ascribing worth and, who has time for that? Now we're just roommates. And then all of a sudden you look at your son or you look at your daughter and just trying to discover their hearts. Even having those awkward conversations and just going, hey, let's go to lunch, or I just don't have time, and they seem so distant. They just seem like they're into their whole own worlds. And then all of a sudden when it comes to friends, like, not like level 1, 2, or 3 friends where you talk about sports and weather, but like level 8, 9, 10 friends. Those friends that there's so much trust and there's vulnerability. And I can just share life when life gets hard, because life's going to get hard for all of us, right? But you just don't have those friends because I don't have time to invest what's needed to get to that kind of friendship. I mean, we feel that. And my question is, why do we do that? Why do we live on the edge when we know these things are happening? I mean, why do we do this? Because the point is, the bottom line is the best of life happens in the margin of life. And I think we know this. I mean, this isn't a Christian thing. This isn't a like, hey, if you're, this is just a people thing. This is for all of us. We know that the best of our relationships, the best of our marriage, the best times we have with our kids, the best times we have financially are when we have margin. The best of life happens in the margin of life. So why don't we do this? Why don't we just make decisions and make a choice and step back from the edge? Why don't we just sell our house and buy a house that's 20% cheaper and have some financial margin? Why don't we just have a discussion with our boss and say, hey, boss, listen, I know you've asked me to do this and this and this, and I want to honor the job and honor the opportunity and the outcomes. And I'll do that. But this is as far as I'm going to go, because I got to go home. I got to go home. There's one unique role in life that I have, and that's being a father. That's being a mother. Why would I ever trade what's unique to me for something someone else is eventually going to do? Because somebody else is eventually going to do it. Why would I do that? Why don't we just step back from the edge? Why don't we step back from the edge financially and just say, hey, I'd like to, but we just financially can't. Why don't we say no? Our kids are going, go, 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 or, maybe your spouse or maybe your friend, go, 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 and they want us to do 10 things. Why don't we say yes to, 2 or 3? But why don't we just say no? Do you know why we do this? And I'm so guilty of this. I'm with you guys. Do you know why we just don't pull back from the edge? It's one word. It's fear. Fear drives so much of what we do. And when I talk about fear, I'm talking about fear of missing out. Oh my gosh, I'm going to miss out. I'm going to miss out. My kids are going to miss out. And here's what's so interesting. Fear drives fear, right? Because it's like, I'm going to miss out. Therefore, tomorrow, next week, next year, a decade from now, I won't have this. So my fear of the future drives my fear of today of missing out. Or my fear of my kids, fear of falling behind. Oh my God, my son's going to fall behind. My daughter's going to fall behind. My career's going to fall behind if I pull back from the edge. Because I know what's going to happen 5 years, 10 years, 20 years from now. And because this is what the future I want, I fear failure here, so therefore I live on the edge here. Or fear of not mattering. Guys, fear of not mattering is one that's just driven me pretty much my whole life. I mean, for the first 35 years of my life, very specifically, this mattered more, honestly, than I think anything. And just in the most transparent moment I can have, if you were to talk to me and say, hey, as a 35-year-old, Buck, this whole thing about, being married and you talk about your beautiful wife, do you really believe that? Like, do you really love her? I would tell you, oh, man, I love Jill. She's amazing. She's a wonderful woman. And I'll give my life for her. Or if you talked to me about my sons when I was 35 and said, hey, do you really love all 5 of your sons? And I'm like, but I do. But it's like, it's hard, yeah, but man, I'd give my life for my sons. I'd do it, But if you looked at my life, it really seemed like something else was more important. I wanted to matter. I wanted worth. I wanted my identity. And I found that when there was progress. I found that when there was achievement. I found that when the ball was moving down the field and we're growing and things are happening and, progress is happening. And if you just made an observation in my life, you would say, Buck, it sure seems like your fear of not mattering is the most important thing in your life. And then I sat down with one of my mentors. And several years ago, and we were talking, and my mentor said, hey, Buck, here's the deal. I've sat on the other side of so many successful people around the world, in our nation. I mean, they've accomplished so much progress. And at the end of the day, when I talk to all of them, and they've got to the pinnacles of everything you desire and everything you think is going to give you worth and value and identity and make you matter, And when I was talking to her, she said this. She said, Buck, but here's the deal. Your legacy is not going to be found in your accomplishments. Your legacy is going to be found in how well you love your wife and how well you love your children, period. And man, that hit me like a ton of bricks. And I had to begin dealing with my fear. So the question becomes, why don't we just deal with our fear? Why don't we step back from the edge? I mean, if the best of life, honestly, your family, your relationships is found in the margin of life, why don't we just do this? And I know what some of you guys are thinking. For some of you guys, you're like, Buck, you just don't understand. I mean, it's a season of my life, and it's so busy, and it's crazy. I just got to go, and I got to go, and I have to live this way. And I get that. I think if we were talking, I'd say, yeah, that's true, and I get that. I think for some of you guys, you go, well, here's what I'm a single mom, I'm a single dad. Buck, you just have no idea what it's like. And yes, I have to live at an unsustainable pace to just provide. And that's true, and I get that. But what if there was a different choice? What if there was a choice we could all make, regardless if you're a Christian or if you're not, that would actually lead to a little bit more margin in our life? And perhaps put us in a posture and a position to where we could actually get to August. And in fact, we could look at our life and go, wow, that was the best summer ever. What is that? Well, what's so cool is that choice is available to all of us. In fact, God invites us into that choice. And one of the things that's so amazing as you think about God and think about this discussion is God continually, throughout, all people groups, as you discover who God is and all, God continually invites all of us throughout all time back from the edge and to trust him. In fact, when you think about the Old Testament, which is, the first half of the Bible before Jesus shows up on the scene, the Old Testament was written specifically to the nation of Israel, specifically to the people of Israel. It wasn't universal to all of us. It was written to that group of people. When you think about the Old Testament, in the Old Testament, God gave the nation of Israel, the people of Israel, these laws, like 600 plus of them. And then there was these 10 commandments, and you may have heard of them, the 10 commandments. Again, those were written specifically to the nation of Israel. And the 10 commandments, as you think about those, the fourth commandment, God really mandated this idea of margin. The fourth commandment says this. It says, remember, because we forget. Remember to observe the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. You have 6 days each week for your ordinary work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath day of rest dedicated to the Lord your God. Now, in the Hebrew, the word Sabbath literally means stop. Just stop. It means stopping or stoppage. It literally means stop doing the necessary. And then the word holy means to be set apart. So stop, set this day apart, dedicate it to the Lord. So when we think of the Sabbath, again, this was specific to the nation of Israel and to the people of Israel. We have to understand their context because we don't get this. Because in their context, they were an agrarian culture. I mean, think about this. Imagine, just kind of go there with me, if you will. Imagine being in an agrarian culture. Imagine not knowing where your next meal is coming from, for real. Imagine having the responsibility of a family. You've got your kids, and you've got your mother-in-law and father-in-law, and your mom and dad. They're all living with you because that's what they did. And you're working the fields, and you're going, man, if it's not going to rain. And there's so much reason to have fear and worry and anxiety. Oh, my gosh. I mean, we may know where the next meal, but that next meal, we have no idea where that's coming from. In that context, God says, hey, kiddo, work 6 days. Get after it. Be busy. You got to provide for your family. But on the seventh day, stop. Pull back from the edge and trust me. And just imagine that context. Well, God, what about my kids? What about my mother-in-law? What about my dad? I mean, I got to feed all and the field and the crops and all the different things. I got to maintain the soil. And God. God says, I know what you need. I need you to trust me and step back from the edge. God consistently invites you and I to have margin in our life. And not only that, but in the Old Testament, there's also something called a tithe. Now, just to be upfront, we're not going to talk about money. So if you just turn me off right there, you heard tithe, and you're like, I'm done. We're not going there. We're talking about this context of margin. I mean, in the Old Testament, again, to the people of Israel, tithe in the Hebrew means 10%. That's all it means, 10%. And what God would say to the nation of Israel is, hey, I want you to set aside 10%, and I want you to trust me with that. And again, in their context, you have to know their context. They didn't have banks and, these big investment firms and all this kind of stuff. They had a box or a jar. And every time they got money, they put money, 10%. God, okay, I'm going to trust you. Here's 10%. You get 10, I get 9. They would put it in the jar. Their kids would see it, their wives, their husband. Everybody would see it, right? And again, this is so incredibly difficult in that culture. I don't know where my next meal's coming from, but God, you're asking me to take my resources, and you're asking me to give you 10%, and I don't know where my next meal's coming from? Oh, God. I'm so worried about this. God says, kiddo, trust me. Step back from the edge. I know exactly what you need. And see, God didn't need their money. This wasn't about God going, I need your money. I need, because I've got things to. No. God was honestly trying to keep their money from getting them. I mean, as you read the narratives and the letters in the scriptures, it's so clear. The number one competition for your heart, I promise you, is your money. That's where we put our identity, our security, our future, our worth. So much of that's wrapped up in our money. And God knew it. And he said, hey, I want your identity and security and worth found in me. So when you get 10 pennies, when you get $10, when you get 1,000, take 10%, pull back from the edge, and trust me. I know exactly what you need. And then there's so many other laws. There's the law of gleaning. Hey, don't, plow all your crops. Leave some for the poor. Well, God, those are all my crops. I did all that work. Yeah, I know. Pull back from the edge. You see this consistently with God. And then we come into the New Testament. Jesus shows up on the scene. And when Jesus shows up on the scene in the New Testament, it's not only for the nation of Israel, it's for everyone. It's for you and I today. And Jesus leans into this conversation. Here's how Jesus says it. Listen to what he says. He says, therefore, I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat or drink, or about your body, what you will wear. Now, guys, again, this is such a big conversation. I'm telling you, if you and I were just sitting here and we're just talking, and we looked at the words of Jesus, Jesus gave us a mandate. Don't do this. Don't worry. Stop. Don't fear. Stop. All that anxiety, taking the worries of tomorrow, next week, next month, bringing them in today. What are you doing? Don't do that. Which, that's hard to hear because this is like black and white from Jesus. This isn't a gray area. Well, can I worry a little bit? Can I have a little bit of anxiety? Jesus is like, no, don't do it. Jesus, can you explain? And Jesus does. He says, come on, guys, for the pagans. Run after all these things. The people who believe in Jupiter and Zeus, Jupiter, the Roman god, Zeus, the Greek god, you know how selfish those gods are, right? Jupiter and Zeus, they're all about themselves and the people are here to serve them. And Jesus is saying, God, I'm representing the one true God, the God who is for you. I'm here to demonstrate he's for you. There's the one true God. See, the pagans who serve these selfish gods, this is how they live their lives. They're constantly worried. So much fear and anxiety. And then, what Jesus says next is so important. So guys, if you're here and you're like, okay, Buck, I'm a little bit bored, be unbored. Because this is now the time to lean in. This will explain so much about your life, about God, and about what we see in the world, what Jesus says next. Here's what he says. Instead of doing what the pagans do, here's what you need to know. He says, and your Heavenly Father knows that you need them. In other words, God knows what you need. So if we hit the pause button, and again, this is for you, so just think. And I ask you this question. I said, do you believe God knows what you need in your life? How would you answer that? Do you believe God honestly knows what you need financially? Do you believe God honestly knows what you need in your marriage? Do you believe God honestly knows what your kids need, and maybe your kids need a little bit of failure? Because isn't that how we learn? And isn't that how they draw closer to God oftentimes, is through their failure? Do you really believe God knows what your kids need? Do you believe God knows what you need at work? Do you believe God knows what you need when it comes to fun in this world? Do you believe God knows That's a big question. And Jesus is teaching us, guys, I have come from heaven. I am here to teach you. God knows what you need, and God knows what you want. And there's a really big difference between what you need and what you want. For example, God knows you need to eat. He knows that. He knows that for all of us. But God also knows most of us, I think if you're anything like me, most of us want jalapeno ranch at Chewy's. I think that's honest, right? He knows we want that. But he knows we need, but we want. I mean, God knows we need to live indoors. He gets it. I get it. You got to put a roof over your head. I get it. But God knows we want that house with that acreage, with that square footage, with those designs. He knows what we want. I mean, God knows you need to spend the time discovering your wife, leveraging you and your resources for the benefit of her. God knows that you need to date her. God knows that there's an adventure to be found in your marriage. He knows what you need. But God knows we want our marriage to work without doing the work. Or maybe that's just me. I mean, I want the results. I want the outcomes without actually doing the work. He knows that. God knows your kids need you to spend the time in the margin discovering their hearts and asking those awkward questions as a father, as a mother, and taking them out to breakfast or lunch or, just staying up late because they all want to stay up till whatever. And I'm like, I got to work in the morning. Again, maybe that's me. But, he knows you need that. And he also knows you want to come home after a long day at work and just have a beer and watch TV and veg out because you're exhausted. He knows what you need, and he knows what you want. Now, here's where it begins to connect, and this is so important. You see, God knows what you need, but God also gives you the freedom to choose what you want. This idea of freedom, guys, is a bigger deal than you know. And this idea of freedom will explain so much about your life, so much about God, and so much about the world that we see. And I'm going to try to give you a quick theology lesson in about 45 seconds. So just know, it's not all the context, but I want you to understand this. You see, when it comes to freedom, here's what you need to know, is that God, by definition, is perfect. God, by definition, is perfect. If God is not perfect, God is not God. By definition, God must be perfect. And therefore, God must be perfect in who he is. And the Apostle John says God is love. And if God is perfect, then God must be perfect in love. But when you look at love, for love to be love must give you a component of your will that is 100% free to choose to love or choose not to love. Or by definition, it's no longer love. Think of it this way. If I really want you to love me, I'm like, oh man, please love me, please trust me. If I make you love me, if I force you to love me, you will love me. What is that by definition? By definition, that's compliance. That's not love. Love, by definition, requires a component of your will that is 100% free to choose to love or not choose to love. And the only thing I can do, if it's going to be perfect love, is to woo you. The only thing I can do is to try to convince you, is to serve you, is to love you first, is to love you unconditionally, is to sacrifice for you, so that perhaps one day you will use that freedom that's in your soul to choose to love me. Guys, God is perfect. God is perfect in his love. Therefore, he has woven intrinsically into your soul a freedom he will not violate. That you are 100% free to choose him or not choose him. To choose what he's invited you into or to choose what you want. And when we leverage that God-given freedom to go, hey, I want that, and I want to do that, and I want to do that with him, and that with her, and I want to cross those lines, and I want to buy that, and I want to do, and I want to, and we live, leverage our God-given freedom to live a life like this. All of a sudden, when you don't have margin in life, when you're trying to get the most out of life, you lose control of your life. And when we start losing control and we see that marriage and we see, our kids and we see these things that are breaking loose, oftentimes we're like, God, why? And here's what's so important to understand is when life starts to fall apart, oftentimes, what do? We blame God for the consequences of freely choosing our wants. You chose him. You chose her. You chose that job. You chose that moral choice. You were free to choose. And when life gets hard or difficult and all of a sudden this is overwhelming, we look to God. God, how could you? I thought you were for me. This is so not fair. I thought you loved me. And God goes, I did, and I do. That's why I gave you freedom to choose, to love me and trust me, or to do what you want. See, guys, we all have freedom, and God's not going to violate that. We have freedom to say, God, I trust God. And I trust he knows what I need. And I'm going to step back from the edge. And I don't understand your timing sometimes. And but God, I'm going to trust you. Or we can say, I just trust me. I'm going to do what I want. I really don't care. I'm going to do what I want, when I want, with whom I want, because it makes me feel good. And I'm going to do it. And then when we end up doing that, and then, perhaps our marriage gets in a crisis and she finally gives us the ultimatum, I'm about to leave. Isn't it interesting how we find all the time in the world to begin to save our marriage? How we begin to have conversations with our boss or with our employer and go, hey, I got to go to counseling. I'm actually going to pay for counseling. I've always said I'll never do it because it's so expensive, but now all of a sudden I'm paying for it. Now all of a sudden I'm investing all this time to save my marriage. I mean, isn't it interesting when our son or daughter's in rehab or their kind of lifeboats flipped over, all of a sudden we'll make all the time in the world to invest in that relationship, to try to save that relationship? My question is, why don't we just do that now? Why don't we just trust God now and pull back from the edge and begin to trust him? Because here's the deal, guys. This is where it's so important to understand. God is not against you. He's for you. Because here's what happens. When we choose to trust that God knows what we need and step back from the edge, we often get what we want. Isn't that true? It's like, okay, God, I'm going to step back from the edge. I'm going to trust you. It's not, it's not my timing. I want this now, but isn't it true we eventually get what we want when we trust God? I've seen this 1,000 times. I mean, I think about Jill and I several years ago had $30,000 in credit card debt. And you can guess, hey, you had $30,000 in credit card debt. Why? And we would say it's because we chased all our wants. And so we were like, hey, I want to go on that vacation. I want that kind of car. I want to hang out with those, friends. I want to go to that restaurant. I want to eat that. And, I want to buy the Bluebell ice cream. I want to buy that gadget. I want it now. And we chased all our wants. And then we found ourselves in a financial mess. And then we just said, okay, God, it's almost like you get to that point. A friend of mine always says, when you're sick and tired of being sick and tired, then you'll actually do something. Where we were like sick and tired. And so we said, okay, God, we'll trust you now. And we pulled back from the edge financially, and we sold our car because we just couldn't afford it. And sure, the experience was better from point A to point B in that car, but we still got to point A and point B in the car that we could afford. And then we began to say, hey, no to our friends. Hey, I'd like to go out to dinner. I'd like to go on that vacation. I'd like to do this. No. And we pulled back. And 9 months later, guess what happened? We began to have financial margin in our life for the first time. And then what happened? We were able to go, oh, that car. And we bought what we wanted, and we paid for it. And then we were able to go, hey, that vacation. Oh, we bought what we wanted, and we paid for it. And we ultimately got what we wanted. But it started with trusting God and stepping back from the edge. And that's exactly what Jesus is teaching us, because he wraps up the whole passage and says that very thing. He says, but seek first. God's invited you to trust him. Seek first his kingdom and his righteousness. God is for you. And all these things you're so worried about, all these things, all this anxiety, all these things will be given to you as well. You got to trust him. So my question to you is this. Where do you need to trust God and step back from the edge? And I think you already know the answer, but as we've been talking, as you think about your life, where do you need to take that step and just go, God, I've been trying to do it my way, and I've been just chasing my wants, and the more I chase it, it's just making life more complex. Where do you need to step back from the edge? And I'm not saying to just sit there and sing Kumbaya, do nothing, and not be productive and not make a difference. I mean, think about the life of Jesus. He accomplished more in 3 years than all of us combined. He changed the world, greatest leader of all time, greatest movement of all time. He did that in 3 years. And he was busy, and there was progress. But he had time to invest in James and John and Peter, his 3 closest disciples, that relationship. He had time to invest the woman at the well and say, hey, tell me about your life and your husband's. He had time to invest and get away on the mountainside with God and go, God, man, can we talk? And spend time with his relationship with the Heavenly Father. I mean, he had margin. So for you, where do you need to step back from the edge and trust God? Perhaps is it with this, with a little prosperity and progress? Maybe you're chasing prosperity and chasing progress, and I know how it feels. I get it, guys. I'm with you. And I know perhaps a fear is driving some of those things. But maybe this is a season where you got to go, man, I got to step back. I mean, my kids, I got to step back. This relationship. I mean, those things you'll never regret. Well, I have a little bit less progress and a little bit less prosperity, but I had way more margin to invest in my marriage, way more margin to invest in my son, way more margin to invest in these very important friendships or relationships. Is that the area for you? Or maybe you just need to say no. Yeah, I mean, hey, all these things are great. There's nothing wrong with, doing these things. But at the end of the day, you can't do all 10 and have margin. The best of life happens in the margin of life. You can't do it. So maybe say yes to 3 and no to 7 of those. And yes, your son or daughter is going to look at you and think you just don't like them, or, oh, you just don't understand. But perhaps no is how to step back from the edge. Maybe for you, maybe it's a moral choice. And the longer you live, you get this. But, when you're young, moral choices, man, it makes me feel good. So I'm going to ride on the edge. I'm going to get on the edge. God, I know you said not to, but that feels oppressing, although God's trying to liberate us. And then the older you get, after you make all these moral choices and cross these lines, God said, please don't cross. I love you, kiddo. Please don't cross. What you discover is the more moral lines you cross, the more complicated life gets. And life's hard enough. So why just not uncomplicate some things? Why not just step back from the edge and go, okay, God, I don't fully get this, but I'm going to trust you know what I need. How about this one? God. Is there, this thing inside of you when it comes to God to go, oh, he's so distant? God, Buck, I hear you talk about experiencing God and his closeness. I don't experience that. Well, have you said yes to a bunch of things over here, which means you have to say no to God? I just don't have time to get in a group. I don't have time to, serve. I don't have time to leverage me for the benefit of others. I don't have time to go do that thing, around the world called Mosaic. I just don't have time. And God seems so distant. Has God invited you to step back from the edge and say no to maybe something out here so you can say yes to him? How about this financially? Do you need to pull back from the edge? Is there something you need to sell? Is there something you need to trust God with? Or maybe even work. Maybe when it comes to work, do you need to have a conversation with your boss and say, this is as far as I'm going to go, but I'm not going to trade what's unique to me for something someone else will eventually do? You see, the bottom line is this. The best of life happens in the margin of life. This is where you get to say, man, we are dating one another. She is so amazing. Our marriage, we've been married 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. It's not going to make your marriage perfect, but it's going to make it a whole lot better. In the margin of life, this is where you get to look in your son or daughter's eye and discover and know their fears and know their hurts and know their concerns, and you can discover their hearts because you've created the margin. This is where when somebody says, hey, how are you doing? You can go, man, I feel great. I feel refreshed and I feel great. I mean, imagine if that was common language. This is where you can put your head on your pillow at night with everything going on and go, because the best of life happens in the margin of life. So my question is, where do you need to step back and trust God? Because if we're willing to make that choice, perhaps we can get to August, and perhaps we can look back on our life and go, man, that was remarkable. That was extraordinary. That was the best summer ever. Let me pray for us. God, thank you again for today. Thank you for this discussion we can have. And Father, I know we're at a million different places on this, but I know you know that. So please meet each of us this week tangibly, Father, tangibly. Would you just kind of bump us, nudge us, and reveal to us where we need to trust you and step back from the edge and create some margin in our life. God, I trust you with that. In Jesus' name, amen. Guys, thanks so much for being here. I'll see you next week.